Hello, everybody, and welcome to the How I Learned to Love Fantasy podcast. I am one of your hosts, Travis Oates.
And I am the other one of your hosts, Dan Billet.
And this show is all about us looking back at our childhood and taking a look at the things that helped shape our love of fantasy.
Yeah, the first things that we really loved and that brought us into the world of fantasy and sorcery and books, really books and movies, the things that made us
TV show.
Yeah, the TV shows, the things that made us games also.
Yep.
The things that made us kind of who we are as far as fans of the genre.
And we've talked about a movie.
Yep.
We've talked about books. Today we are going to talk about a video game.
Yes.
And specifically,
or more than one.
Yeah, it's a whole series of games, specifically the Gold Box games. Now, these games started in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They were available. So a little bit of background on these games. TSR had been approached by practically every video game company out there at the time.
TSR, the publisher of Dungeons and Dragons.
Who was the publisher of Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. And they were not interested in doing video games. They had no interest in it, and so they had told them no for the longest time.
Computers were a fad back then.
Sure.
So it was not going to last for long.
And finally, they were ready to pull the trigger on it. So they basically had this cattle call and told all of video gamedom, come at us, tell us what you want to do with it, impress us.
Okay.
And all these big Electronic Arts, some Sierra, some of the biggest makers of video games at the time pitched to TSR how they would make a Dungeons and Dragons video game.
Okay, cool.
And a tiny, tiny little company called SSI, Strategic Simulations Incorporated, which was literally like 8 guys.
Right.
They did almost exclusively war games.
Okay.
They're the ones that won out, and it shocked the entire industry.
Right.
Nobody saw that coming. And it was because they basically went to TSR and they said, look, we don't want to make a game. We want to make an experience that, just like someone who would play your modules, they could start with a set of characters and they could continue with those characters throughout multiple modules. That we want to basically replicate the module experience that's in Dungeons and Dragons and make that experience on the computer.
Yeah, it was the birth of what has become the modern computer RPG in a lot of ways.
To a certain extent, yeah. I would say even more so, though. I mean, with the exception of Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, the model still today has gone backward. I mean, I don't say gone backward, but very rarely, with the exception of like a Mass Effect or something, do you have a character that you play in one game that you continue your advancement from that one game moves over to the advancement in the next game. Because Baldur's Gate 3, for example, which is the biggest fantasy game of the last few years, that's a contained game. There's not going to be a Baldur's Gate 4 in which you take that party and then take it to Baldur's Gate 4. They have already said they're not doing that. And this was, I mean, I believe Pool of Radiance, I think only took you up to 4th level. I want to say it was 1 to 3. It wasn't that far in. So the first game to come from this was Pool of Radiance. And I'm sure you could tell me in the comments, I believe it was either 1 to 3 or 1 to 4.
I don't remember.
I don't believe you got 3rd level spells in this game.
Okay.
And it even says a role-playing epic volume 1 on it.
Right.
And that's exactly how the modules work. So if you get modules in Dungeons and Dragons, it'll be this, it's for players from 1st to 4th level, and then the next in the series, from 4th to 8th or so forth. You gain about 3 to 4 levels in each module experience, basically. Right. So Pool of Radiance came out, and so for those of you who've never played a game before, it basically had 2 modes. It had this mode here, which was combat. So combat, you see behind me, combat was on a strategic map that you moved in that was turn-based. So with I mean, this was 1988, so the graphics are pretty crude by today's standards. But you would be on a strategic map, and your party would fight monsters on that strategic map.
Right.
And then there was this mode, which was when you were not in party mode and you would talk. This is an NPC that you're talking to here. And so about half the game would take place in each mode. Now,
And there was a little bit of moving around also between, like, walking through town.
But this
and
was
stuff like
actually
that,
in
but-
the overhead mode.
Right. Yeah.
This is the that you would be in. You will also, one of the things that I remember the most is the most god awful font. The font that they choose, and it was in every single gold box game.
Yeah.
The font in these games was painful for your eyes. Whoever decided that this was the font that we were going to use for the next like 12 games should be punched right in the mouth. I don't know why they allowed that. It was hard to read, and you really had to get used to it.
You also have to imagine that these were on early monitors, so everything was a lot blurrier.
Right.
Like that, you also had to refer to books that came with the game, so that would say, read, section 41 and see what that says when you would go talk to somebody.
Also, and don't change the screen here, even though I'm putting my hand up. You'll notice over here, old school ACs
that goes.
and the
Yeah.
negatives. The lower your AC was back in those days, the better. And so this is not from Pool of Radiance, because this is like they're sporting some crazy ACs there. So that's from a much later game, probably from Pool of Darkness, actually.
Yeah.
So and this game was a big hit. It was when SSI got the license to do this, they actually went from 8. They hired a bunch of. They went from 8 to 25 people in the company, like
Right.
instantly. Dropped everything else that they were doing, and this kind of became what they did for the next few years. And it was a giant hit. It was on PC. It was one of the few games, and this is one of the reasons we're talking about it. You got to play this because it came out on the Mac.
It did. A couple of years later. It took a little while later, but it came out on the Mac.
Came out. In fact, if you look at the next, it came out on Nintendo.
Oh,
There's the
I didn't know
Nintendo version of it. So this is one of the few games from that era that started out on a PC and then moved to the consoles.
yeah.
I believe it was available on Genesis, on Nintendo. Some of the weirder consoles of the time. I don't have a full list in front of me, but it was for that day, it was one of the few titles that, because most of the PC titles, like the Ultimas and stuff
Mhm.
like that, they never really made that shift to
Mac, not until-
consoles, especially
or to consoles now. Yeah.
because a lot of them are hard to make that transition to. But I think they designed it from the beginning to be able to be ported over to consoles, which is pretty smart on their part, because it sold gabillions. But you didn't really play. Pool of Radiance is not your experience.
Well, I did play it.
did
Yeah,
play it.
but I came to it because it expanded not just to other consoles, but
Sure.
to other media. So I really came to this from the books, because the book, actually, I think the game came out first.
Yes, it would have. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the book came out, which was not the case with the other ones.
And they made physical modules of these as well. So you
Right,
could get a D&D module.
Right, where you
to
could
play
play
through,
tabletop play
the
through.
story as well.
Yeah, but I came to these through the book. So I think the first book that actually came out in that was one of the video games was actually Azure Bonds.
So that's the next in
Yep.
this series. So the Pool of Radiance was followed by Curse of the Azure Bonds.
Yeah, and then
which was so Curse was the one that sold more than any. It's the second in the series, and it sold by far more than any of the other than Pool that came before it, and it sold more than any of the ones that came after it too. It was a monster hit.
largely because of the cover.
Yeah. Well, actually, you'll notice. We'll talk about that a little bit.
No, yeah.
So when we start going through all the different games, you'll see that a number of the covers have a quite attractive woman on them. And they tracked that the games that had an attractive woman on them sold much better than the ones that did not.
Shocking.
Yeah,
Shocking that
yeah.
a bunch of young
Yeah,
boys.
because there are a
wanted-
few that didn't, and then you start
Right.
to see them go, maybe we just put a babe on the front of every single one because they're selling so much better.
But this was also really the time when Forgotten Realms, the world of Forgotten Realms, which
Sure.
is still the prevalent world in D&D, like Faerun and with Cormyr and Sword Coast and all those.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate would come from that.
Absolutely.
Neverwinter.
Neverwinter, yeah. Phandalin, Icewind, you
Sure.
know, like all those came from Forgotten Realms. And this was, you know, the era where that really cemented
So you're
itself.
saying you think that book came out before the
The
other
game,
one, huh?
I think the game came out first.
No, but the Azure
and
Bonds
then
book
Azure
came
Bonds
out.
came out before the game, and it came out actually, I think, before Pool of Radiance, the book came out.
That's crazy if that's the case, because that's pretty unusual.
Yeah, and so I was handed this at summer camp, I think the following year. And when the game actually came out, I was so excited because I think I had already read Azure Bonds. These were all parts of trilogies or quadrilogies that were separate. Pool of Radiance was a different series than Azure Bonds, which I have now.
Huh? No. Pool of Radiance and Azure Bonds was the same. So it was from the same.
Nope.
Yes. The first four were Curse of the Azure Bonds. I mean, Pool of Radiance, Curse of the Azure Bonds, something of silver. We'll get to it. It's next, and Pool of Darkness. That is the original quadrilogy.
No,
I don't know if it is in the books, but it certainly is in the game.
Not in the games, because in the books, it's Azure Bonds. There's Song of the Sorials. There's where it sort of takes, and then it actually branched off from there. But in the books, it was a completely separate trilogy from the pool series. Yeah,
because that's not the case in the video game.
I didn't know, because I only played Pool of Radiance and Curse of the Azure Bonds.
Yeah, in the video game, the story goes directly from Pools of Radiance into Curse of the Azure Bonds,
Right.
into it's escaping me the name. It's the next slide, and it was a full story that went through 4, and 4 is the most that they ever did.
Right.
The next one they did 2, and then the next one after that was 3.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So this is in the books. This was a completely separate trilogy.
Sure.
I think quadrilogy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I find it fascinating that the books technically didn't follow the story in the video game.
Yeah. No.
They just said, screw it. We're gonna make something completely different. Because I never read the books.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think they found that they had a winning character with Alias from Azure Bonds,
Okay.
and so
Secret of the Silver Blade. That's
yes,
what the
right,
third one
okay,
was.
right. And Alias from Azure Bonds, when it had her own trilogy, she came back in one of the other.
Is that who's depicted on the front?
That
there?
is who. Yeah,
Okay.
her name is Alias, and they explain the armor. So it's magical armor. So the giant bit that's open usefully when it comes to armor, right in the middle,
Sure.
is actually protected, even though it
Where
doesn't
the
look
heart
that way.
is, yeah.
Right? Yeah. But they explain that away in the books.
All right. Well, so and these games came out very quickly, especially by today's standards. So the Pool came out in 88, and Curse of the Azure Bonds came out in 89. And then the next one, which was, this is just to show that the visuals didn't change at all. The visuals were the exact same visuals that we saw in the first game.
And the fighting style was very much the same, except for the spells got better. So like you would always kind of
because you got higher level spells.
Right. But you would cast, like when you start off, you would cast Sleep and then just stab everybody while they're sleeping, and then later on you would cast Fireball, and it would have the similar effect, except it would just actually take
Usually
everybody
take out half your party. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, your party also.
You did it too close.
Which was always a danger. Yeah.
So if now we should go. Yeah, there we go. Secret of the Silver Blades.
That's right.
Which did not sell as well, because it did not have an attractive woman on the cover. So of course they went to Pools of Darkness.
Right.
Made sure that there was 3 attractive women on the cover of Pools of Darkness, and not shockingly, it sold much better than Secret of the Silver Blades. And these each came out in successive years. So 88, 89, 90, 91, which is a crazy pace. But part of the reason was they basically didn't change the engine at all. They made slight rules improvements, mostly to the overland stuff. But in general, it was basically the same game. Uh, they also, SSI, the main crew, had such a hit on their hands that they decided to branch off and have another studio start to make games at the same time.
All right.
Because the demand was so great and people would go through them that they needed more stories. So they got Stormfront Studios, and they put out a game called Gateway of the Savage Frontier and made sure that there was an attractive woman on the cover. And actually, that picture, and that came out at the same time that same year that Secret of the Silver Blades came out.
Gotcha.
And they made sure there was an attractive woman on the cover because they learned their lesson. I'm sorry, it came out at the same time Pools of Darkness did. I'm sorry.
Brett in the booth here. I really enjoy official computer product that just like this is for official computer product.
The official Advanced Dungeons
I think it was the
Dragons.
official. I think the official part was the Advanced Dungeons. and Dragons.
Oh,
But yes,
okay.
Because
But
there
it
were
is
lots of rip-offs.
It is a computer product.
exactly, exactly. I'm sorry. So this actually came out at the same time Pools of Darkness came out, and we'll talk about why that is, and it's kind of a really funny story a little later, and that was followed by Treasures of the Savage Frontiers.
It's weird that it's yet again an attractive woman on the
isn't that strange?
Yeah.
It's almost as if after Secrets of the Silver Blades, they learned that maybe that wasn't great marketing.
Right.
Was one of their issues the women slowly lost more clothes throughout these battles?
Yeah. You'd think.
And their hair just got bigger as the
more
80s.
and more 80s rock bandish.
Yes.
The stories from these were not great, I would say. The combat was pretty cool, and it was pretty neat to see D&D combat with D&D rules. They did a pretty good job of trying to capture because Dungeons and Dragons started out as a war game. It started out as chainmail, and SSI was definitely a war game making company. And so they did the combat pretty well. The stories were okay. I think the best story was probably in Curse of the Azure Bonds, and I think that's one of the reasons why it was probably the biggest hit.
Yeah.
It had the most interesting story.
I liked Pool of Radiance also was good though, where you're trying to free the city essentially from the monsters have overrun it.
Sure,
that
but like your interactions with NPCs, you were limited. One of the things I think that later on, when another company took over the TSR license for Dungeons and Dragons and made Baldur's Gate, I think one of the reasons why people were thrilled with that was because Baldur's Gate had such great writers. Like one of the downsides to having SSI do this is they were not a Sierra or they weren't a company that did story-driven games.
No, they developed a combat system which was really accurate and faithful to a computer version of Dungeons and Dragons.
I think they captured the imagination of the TSR guys by saying, we're going to make this modules.
Right.
We're going to turn this into, so that was.
And that's kind of that, just even the way that they set up combat was kind of very much what I meant when I was talking about how that has carried through into Baldur's Gate now and into Dragon's Age and things like that. The way that, or Dragon Age, the way that the term, which is again going back to Dungeons and Dragons, it's the kind of turn-based combat and that sort of stuff. They really sort of set the precedent for that.
And pretty much any time they tried to go to a non-turn-based combat, or at least to an engine where you could not pause and make it, because some of the Baldur's Gate have like pseudo turn-based combat. Right, where you can kind of let it go real time and then pause it at moments that you want. Anytime they tried to make it so it was more of a action oriented thing, it failed pretty horribly.
Yeah.
But you were talking about books, and at the time, the book series that was doing the absolute best for Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm sure you read them, was the Dragonlance
Oh yeah, absolutely.
series.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, they asked SSI to start making some Dragonlance games.
Right. The Kryn, something. The
Yeah,
World
and it was
of
right
Kryn.
around the time of Secret of the Silver Blades. And so they did. So they made Champions of Kryn.
That's right.
And they followed that up with Death Knights of Kryn, neither of which had attractive women on the front of the cover. And they did okay. They didn't do great.
Right.
To the point where an internal decision was made between TSR and SSI to have Micro Magic do the third one and put attractive women back on the cover.
Scantily clad. Yeah.
Dark Queen of Kryn.
That's right.
I
think I had that one.
which did okay.
Right.
But you could start to see the interest in the gold box because they still looked exactly the same.
Sure.
They still had the same font. They still had the same general mechanics.
Yeah.
And I think people were starting to get tired of the engine. The engine was starting to. There were other games that had come out around the same time that showed some advancements in those areas. And, this is now 1992. So this is from 88 to 92 is, it's approximately really 5 years if you can't count it that way, 80, 89, 90, 91, 92. And it was starting to look a little bit old. So,
but rest assured that Micro Bikini was full body armor magically.
Yeah, of course,
absolutely.
you have no doubt.
Brett Sheridan in the booth. Yes, absolutely. Now, so if you're SSI, and you can see that the engine is getting old and people are getting tired of that, what's the last thing that you probably want to do?
The exact same thing
but with an IP that nobody cares about.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's probably not what you
Yeah.
want to do.
So at the time, TSR owned the rights to Buck Rogers.
Right.
And they had the Buck Rogers role-playing game, which was doing horribly.
Right.
But one of the executives, in fact, the executive that just so happened to be in charge of licensing IP to computer companies, owned the IP of Buck Rogers for TSR outright.
Right. It was a woman who kind of came in a little bit to TSR a little bit later, and
she really thought that Buck Rogers in this would kill in this format. So we got this here. We got Buck Rogers Countdown to Doomsday. By the way, that is from the Sega Mega Drive.
Wow. I don't even remember the Sega Mega Drive.
Sega Mega Drive. Oh yeah. That was around for a hot second. I tried to mix these pictures up with as much as different video game consoles and stuff as I could. And it looked like this. And we also got Matrix Cubed, which looked like this. So
exactly the same in space.
Well,
no,
the font
is
so much better. But other than that, it's exactly the same game. It's exactly the same game. But instead of running around as characters that you create, you're running around as Buck Rogers and his friends.
I see.
So the Buck Rogers show, which was quite popular, was a good 5 years ago. At this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was from the 70s. We're now, this is now 92 when Matrix Cubed came out. So yeah, and here's another, look at that.
Oh, the graphics improved.
Oh yeah, you really like that. That is it's a handsome man there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So still got the AC, still got the HP. It's just it's basically still Dungeons and Dragons.
Space Dungeons and Dragons.
Space Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
But not Star Wars Dungeons and Dragons, which might have done very well.
Sure.
It was Buck Rogers' Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Which, as it turned out, literally nobody cared about. This sold unbelievably poorly. It actually sold worse than the role-playing game did
Right.
for TSR.
Wow.
So that was kind of the death knell of the gold box games. Now, meanwhile, while it was going downhill, we got a couple other gold box games in there. We got the big one was this one here. So we nope. That should have been did we skip one? Yep. Oh, maybe not. All right. Well, this one was, so Spelljammer did come out. It wasn't attached to any of the others.
Okay.
It was kind of a attempt to capture the excitement of the Buck Rogers series, but put it more in the fantasy. And Spelljammer was fairly popular at the time. It did not do well. But before that, yes. So this is the one I was looking for. I misled. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Brett. This is mine. So we had Neverwinter Nights. Now, this is not the Neverwinter Nights that most people out there are thinking
Right.
of. That was actually produced by the same folks who did Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2. This is Neverwinter Nights that was in the exact same gold box format.
Okay.
However, it was an online game. It was a massively multiplayer online version of the game.
In 1990.
In 1991.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just hearing the modem sound when you dial up.
Yeah. Yeah. It had its fans.
Yeah.
It didn't do great, but it didn't. I mean, it wasn't Ultima Online, which would have been its big competitor at the time. Ultima Online was kind of the big dog in the day, but it did okay. It probably extended the life of the gold box games another year or so.
Okay.
And then the last gold box game to ever come out was this one here. Oh no! I guess I threw that in there to show that that's the Neverwinter Nights you're probably thinking of. It wasn't that one. It was the other one. So here's the last gold box game. So this was Unlimited Adventures, and this was basically their way of saying, and now we give this to the world. And it was as you can see there, fantasy construction kit, and they basically released a fully configurable version of the game that had almost all the tools and assets that they had accumulated over the years with all the other games. And then you can make your own adventures. And this was in 1993. People had pretty much been done with it, but this sold decently, and a real kind of underground group of people really grabbed onto this, and there were like hundreds and hundreds of homemade adventures that you could go through, and some of them are like really good.
Yeah.
Some of them are huge, and you could just see the home, the homebrewed adventures, that people had done, other DMs recreating that stuff, and it had a small but dedicated group for about the next 10 years.
Wow.
That were still creating stuff using this fantasy construction kit.
Did any stuff that started that you know of that started as Unlimited Adventures, did that become part?
I don't think so. Not
no.
like the one that they have now. Oh, what's the name of it? There's a make your own video game program now that some of those have become like Steam hits.
Right.
I don't believe so, because it was all free. I think within the game itself, you could not monetarily you couldn't sell the modules.
I just was wondering if they even became like modules.
I don't know. I mean, there could be people too that were fledgling game designers that started creating this. I know I had it, and I created a few, spent hours and hours and hours creating my own little.
And did they translate into things that you took to the table as well?
Yeah, I mean, I tried.
Sure.
I mean, I tried to take stuff that I had done as a DM and make it, into an adventure and kind of stuff. The problem was, it just, I had such grand designs of what I wanted to do, and the engine was, it was limited
Right.
to a certain extent. And so I would get like,
Wow, your designs outpaced the technology
yeah,
that you
yeah.
were trying to make work.
I
for
would
you?
get like a third of the way through it and then just
Sure.
lose steam because I would try and do something and get frustrated that I couldn't do it.
So you played these on a PC, right?
I did.
Yeah. Did you cheat?
No,
'Cause-
no, you were telling me that's like that one of the downsides to it on a Mac is that you couldn't cheat.
You couldn't
on PCs,
cheat. And
you could.
yeah, apparently on PCs you could use character editors and make sure. And so but
Yeah.
what people did though to cheat even on Macs was they would re-roll and re-roll and re-roll their characters to get max stats, or then
Yeah.
re-roll and then you had to like literally turn off the game or quit out of the game and then come
I didn't
back
have
and-
to do that.
Well, maybe that's the cheating that I was
maybe
thinking of.
maybe that's like a Mac thing.
Yeah.
But like this was the first game. This and a game called Wizardry.
Mhm.
Wizardry would be the first one which I had done this in, but where you just sit and you hit the reroll button over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, just hoping for that like, oh wow, I rolled 3 18s.
Right.
And I don't remember. I'd have to go back because I haven't played a gold box game in decades. But I don't remember whether you could change the stat. Like I think you might have just had to roll them, and that's what they were.
That's what
I don't
yeah.
think you were able to take this 18 and put it here, kind of thing.
No, you
So
kind of were
if you-
stuck with what the stats, and then you had to really kind of choose your character.
And it's well, especially if you wanted to be like a paladin, because
Right.
back then this was second. I believe this was second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and so like to be a paladin, you had to have like pretty high stats in various different places. And I remember in Wizardry, it was like, God, what was the bishop? Like there were ones where you just had to get really high stats to be able to be that.
Right.
So that would be one of the ones that you would reroll and reroll for. But I certainly did that. Like, and I would imagine it took like 4 hours to make my first party because I would just cheese it to the 9th degree.
Well, what I remember is the grind. Like I remember
Sure.
the grind of having to go, like, because it's a dungeon crawler. It's a true dungeon crawler, So you go
Right.
into even if the dungeon is like the monster covered part of town or whatever,
Sure.
and you go in there and then you face 75 kobolds, over
Sure.
the course, and then having to use exactly the same tactics every single time. You put them to sleep, you stab them.
But I think because you did not play a lot of these kind of computer games.
Well, I didn't have
right?
access to a lot of them
Right,
because a
you
lot
had
of
a
them weren't
Mac
on
and
the
there were
Mac.
like 7 games out for the Mac.
Exactly.
I
I had a Mac SE, so
Sure.
just
Sure.
for clarity's sake. It was
Yeah.
more
Suck
powerful.
Extra is what that stood for,
I
I
don't
believe.
think that's what that's special edition.
Yeah. So because a grind was a part of everything back in those days. Like
Yeah.
every video game was how do we have them spend the most time to do the least amount of things?
Right.
So because Wizardry was the same. I mean, Wizardry was Wizardry, you take 3 steps, die, and then, oh, well, I can start again.
Right.
But especially with your first level characters. So, and it did have like, there are things that they changed to make it, because what you do in like Pool of Radiance, especially when you're first level, is you do a couple things, you get absolutely trashed, and then you'd rest. You'd like take a full day's rest after every combat, basically.
I actually went and played Pool of Radiance. Like I
just
got,
recently?
Yeah,
In preparation for this?
Yeah.
How was it?
It's exactly what it was. Like,
Sure.
you had like 3 options at any given moment.
Sure.
You would go into a temple and they'd say, "Do you want healing?" You'd say no, and they'd say, "You must leave." Like,
Right.
and then you would go off to the next. You go to the store, and you would everything took forever.
Yeah.
And wasn't fun. Like
Sure.
until you got to the combat, and then that was fun, and then it was just same thing over and over.
It was the limits of the day.
Yeah, but it was neat to
And I will
revisit
say
that.
there were some that were more fun than others. Like
Azure Bonds was like, I would
no,
say.
I'm talking even from the Gold Box games. So the other games at the time that were were like Might and Magic comes to mind. Like Might and Magic, I think I enjoyed more than the Gold Box games.
Which
just
I also think that was on Mac, but I didn't have. I don't think I
Could have
could
been.
convince my parents to get
Could
that
have
for
been.
me. So
yeah, because Might and Magic was another one of those party-based games.
yeah,
Um, uh, Wizardry was up to, I think, Wizardry 6 or 7 by then, and I really loved, I think, Wizardry 6 or I can't remember whether it was 6 or 7. The one that you started after a shipwreck. That one I really, really, really enjoyed. But they were like adding. You could see, and this is, I think, was the Gold Box Games downfall, is they were adding some extra things there that made the story more engaging
right.
and more interesting, and was also making combat faster. I think the biggest problem with the biggest thing that was great about the Gold Box Games and the biggest thing that was bad about the Gold Box Games is that the combats took a very, very, very long time. Just
Yes.
regular D&D.
Yeah.
They took a very long time. And so when you already have a grind, and then you put on top of that a grind where every combat is not a minor thing, but a major thing, and would take, a minimum of 15 minutes if you're
Right.
lucky, then yeah, I could see how people started to get tired of the. I think when they started out, it was like, oh man, I can play D&D on my computer,
Right.
and that because you had never been able to do that before, that was pretty cool.
And the boxes, for all the scantily cladness of them, looked like
Modules.
like modules.
Yeah.
And it was super
Yeah.
exciting to.
And
like,
the artwork on the front of each of those is really
It's
quite
great.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it was done by the top artist of the day.
Yeah.
But once that novelty, I think, wore off,
Yeah.
It did the frailty of the engine, I think, started to be. But I mean, I bought every one of them.
right.
Every single one of them I bought. I played through to its completion Pool of Radiance, Curse of the Azure Bonds. I didn't get all the way through Secret of the Silver Blades, and I think I barely played Pool of Darkness.
I think so. I had Pool of Radiance and Azure Bonds. I never finished any of them.
Yeah.
I crapped out because I just could not stand the grind, and I kept thinking, "Oh, I'll this time I'll do it." And I think I also had the Kryn one, the third or the last of the Kryn ones, and I just could not stand. But I would love in a future one for you, because I don't have any experience of Wizardry, and I know you love that game or loved it. Like
the
it was,
series in particular. Yeah,
I would love to hear about that at some point, because I just don't have any experience.
I'm
of it.
trying to think of whether I made maps of the dungeons in the Gold Box games.
Where you actually drew them.
Actually drew them.
I mean, you had to.
I think I did. I know I did with Wizardry. That was a big thing with Wizardry. But Wizardry was a set, each floor was a set size.
Right.
So it was easy to make those maps.
So
And I'm trying to remember whether I did that with the Gold Box games.
So in the version that I bought on Steam of Radiance and Azure Bonds, it maps it for you, and
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that that's a recent addition.
And later versions of Wizardry did that as well.
Right.
But and this is what I say. I don't remember whether they mapped it for. And leave in the comments if you remember.
Yeah.
In the original games, whether they mapped it for you or whether you had to map it.
I remember thinking that you or my memory is of having to do that.
Yeah, I know in the Wizardry games, I absolutely, because I actually still have some of that.
Some of the maps.
Some of the maps.
Oh
yeah,
my god.
Of the original Wizardry.
Then
of
please.
just me. I'll see if I can bring them in.
Yeah, please do.
Because I hardly ever get rid of anything. I was shot somewhere in my house is a box that have got all the physical boxes from this.
The Gold Box.
I know I have them. I just couldn't find them in time for this episode. I found a bunch of other stuff, which you'll see on future videos when we talk about video games, but not this particular one. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed them. But after the first two, I would play them and get a certain amount the way through them, but never finish them. I don't think.
I will say my love for these, and really what really came through the books, and because I read all of them, and I have since read them to my kids. And the Azure Bonds series was great. The Pool of Radiance series was pretty good. The Dragonlet series was amazing. but it was really the books that spurred me to the game, and less
Sure.
than the game to the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really was, it's hard to explain to people these days because you have such a large number of things that you can go to nowadays. My son, the number of things that he can experience on a computer, just online, on the shows he can watch. But the thrill of playing D&D in a computer game for the first time, in pools and in Curse in particular, really was amazing.
Yeah, it was
really
so
did
cool.
feel to see strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, charisma. What am I missing?
Dexterity.
Dexterity. It really was cool to see those character sheets and to use the spells that you had used in your campaigns all those years, to see a magic missile, to see these spells in action, was really neat. And that was definitely, that certainly enhanced my appreciation for Dungeons and Dragons. And it did lead to me seeking out more games like it. That's for, like the Gold Box games.
Yeah, I just remember being over the moon getting to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
even if it was a grind.
That being said, they pale in comparison to the next people who got this license and created a little game named Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, well, let's talk about
Baldur's Gate, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, one of these days. Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 in particular, and by the same company, Planescape Torment. Baldur's Gate 2 and Planescape Torment were two of the best games ever created with in all of fantasy. Those two games were masterworks. But that wouldn't have happened, I don't think, without going through the Goldback games first.
So. Yeah, so thanks SSI.
Yeah, thanks.
Who went out of business many years ago.
They did. They got this. Unfortunately, they got sold off to Mindscape, I believe.
Right.
I don't know. I didn't look that up, but I think the company that got sold to was Mindscape. So that's this episode of How I Learned to Love Fantasy.
Well, that was some fantasy that we loved.
Yeah.
It's still love.
And still, I was going to say, we do a live play Dungeons and Dragons game called Dungeon Call.
Yeah, you should come and watch that.
Yeah, so
it's really fun.
Yeah, and part of the reason that I am a DM is because of the Gold Box games. And some
just brought it all the way back around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, join us next week, where I believe we're going to take a look at television.
We'll see. We'll see if that's what
maybe.
we do. Yeah. Let's not box ourselves in.
No,
Let's
we
go
don't
crazy.
box ourselves in.
Maybe
It's
it'll
gonna
be
be
TV.
television.
It's going to be probably.
Yeah, it's going to be television
for sure.
Maybe. I don't know what order these are going to be in.
Yeah. No, me neither. But
so I probably shouldn't have said anything. It's going to be television.
Now it's going to be television for sure.
Now.
Yeah, not to say that there'll be a cape and blue pajamas.
Cape and blue pajamas.
Yeah. Well, not blue, I guess. Originally, it would be black and white pajamas, but nonetheless, like yes, maybe that will be maybe.
That's right. He's talking about Wonder Woman. Everybody.
That was you already pulled that rug out from under me already.
All right, we will see you next week. I'm Travis Oates.
Thank you. I'm Dan Billet,
and thank you for joining us on our podcast.